When Steve and Jeff were on the podcast review show, here's what they said about video.
We will have to do video at some point.
And Todd Cochran from the New Media Show just got back from the Philippines, and here's what he heard.
Actually, the folks I talked to that were doing media were mostly audio. And they felt like they were being forced to do video and were kind of hesitant to do video.
And look, I always say, if you've got the time, the budget, and the ability to tackle that extra complexity, do video. My problem is with the word have. You have to do video. And I've talked to people who have amazing ideas for a podcast, and they decide not to do them because they don't want to do video, because it just sounds like everybody's doing video, especially when you hear presentations from people like YouTube. Please consider the source on that podcasts, giant quotation marks, are blowing up on YouTube. And I said, look, I want to hear what you have to say. 3 options. I'm doing nothing on YouTube. I'm using static videos on YouTube, or I'm doing full YouTube videos. And I'm dying to hear what you say, because I'm pretty sure not everybody is doing video. Hit it, ladies.
The School of Podcasting with Dave Jackson.
Podcasting since 2005. I am your award-winning Hall of Fame podcast coach, Dave Jackson. Thanking you so much for tuning in. If you're new to the show, I help you plan, I help you launch, I help you grow your show. If you want to monetize, I can help with that as well. My website is schoolofpodcasting.com. Use the coupon code LISTENER, that's LISTENER, when you sign up for either a monthly or yearly subscription. And of course, you can join worry-free, not with a 7-day, not with a 14-day, a full 30-day money-back guarantee. And so today, like I said, we're going to talk about what are you doing with YouTube, because I've heard all these reports and I'm like, let's go to the audience, and there's no shade here on anything. There are no wrong answers. If you're not doing anything with YouTube, that's fine. If you're just doing some sort of static image video, that's fine. And if you're doing full video, that's fine. I just wanted to get some sort of report from real podcasters on what's going on. Let's kick it off with Dan.
Hey, Dave. This is Dan from Based on a True Story. To answer your question of the month, I've actually done all 3 the options that you mentioned over the course of my show. I started my podcast in 2016, and at first it was audio only. I didn't do anything on YouTube. Then, for many years, I stayed focused on audio and only uploaded videos of, basically, it's not really a static image. I just did a screencast of my DAW's edited audio-only version doing a playthrough. So it wasn't an entirely static image, but it's obviously audio-only. I think I started that in 2017. But this year, I started to focus on actually having proper video on YouTube. And it's not for a reason that I've ever seen any other podcasters mention, because it really doesn't have anything to do with the podcast itself. The primary reason to incorporate video for me is for posterity. At one point, my daughter mentioned that she was glad I did a podcast so she could have all those audio recordings of me after I'm gone. So I wanted to add video to that because I'm a history podcaster, and I would have loved if generations past from my own family had videos like that of themselves. And so I figured it's a great way to add something to my family for generations to come. Whether or not future generations of my family will ever want to watch it, who knows? But for me, it's worth the extra time to produce video because I'll get to have that body of work created for posterity. Of course, I mentioned that's the primary reason. It's not the only one, because there are some listeners who have told me they prefer to see the video too. So some people prefer video, some prefer audio, and I like to offer both options for my audience. I should also point out that not all of my episodes have video. I do a weekly episode that is audio only. And because of the way that my show started, my audience is primarily audio only. But any interviews that I do, I include the video if my guest is okay with it. Some guests can't do video, some guests don't want to do video, and that is perfectly okay as well. But anyway, that has been my approach to YouTube. As always, thank you for everything you do for podcasters. Again, this is Dan from Based on a True Story, the podcast that compares your favorite Hollywood movies with history over at basedonatruestorypodcast.com.
And I'll have a link to everybody's website out at schoolofpodcasting.com/933. And I'll actually put a link to a time when Dan co-hosted the Ask the Podcast Coach show with me. And Dan's a full-time podcaster, so he's got a lot of knowledge and does a great show.
Hey Dave, Max Truscott of the Aviation News Talk podcast here. What I do with the show on YouTube and what I'd like to do on YouTube are two different things. Aviation News Talk is hosted on Libsyn, and they automatically distribute a version of the show to YouTube that has one static image. But I've recently started including chapter images in the podcast, so now people using podcast apps that display images see at least 6 or 7 different images during the podcast. And ironically, these people see more images on a podcast app than people see on YouTube because only the podcast thumbnail gets used there. I recently sent a note to Libsyn suggesting they modify uploads to YouTube to include all of the chapter images in an episode, as that would improve the YouTube user experience a little bit. What I'd really like to be doing is full videos of the podcast on YouTube, but that hasn't seemed practical for a couple of reasons. One, I do a lot of edits to fix words in the show, and making those same edits in YouTube would be time-consuming and result in a choppy image. Second, Aviation News Talk is primarily a solo show, though we occasionally have some terrific guests, and we talk about safety and training-related topics for private pilots. But I'm not sure there's a lot of value to watching a single talking head on YouTube. And of course, putting out a full version would require tons of extra time, which I don't currently have. But I'm thinking about ways to get there. Dave, thanks for all you do. I signed up for the School of Podcasting courses over 7 years ago before starting this show. And of the more than 250 aviation podcasts, Aviation News Talk typically ranks number 1 or number 2 in the U.S. in the Apple Podcast app. And you can find the show at aviationnewstalk.com.
Yes, thank you, Max. And yeah, if you want to add chapters to your podcast, I'll put a link. I use Hindenburg for my podcast, for my audio. I believe you can do this in Descript. And if you're on Mac, there is a tool called Forecast, and you can add images. You can add links. It's really cool. And if your media host doesn't support chapters, then email support and say, hey, why aren't you supporting this feature or a 2.0 feature? Because media hosts do not build things that their audience, they don't want. You have to bug them for that.
Hi, Dave. It's Craig here from inglespodcast.com, answering your question of the month about YouTube. And I probably fall somewhere between the second and third option, which means I do have my podcast sent by the Libsyn host to YouTube, and I jump in there to change the episode image. And to be honest, I don't get many views, but I think it's important to be on YouTube as a podcaster because many people, and I include myself in that, sometimes have YouTube running in the background, listening only to the audio while I'm doing something else. So it can be used basically as a podcast player, but with the option to watch the video if you want to, if there is one, of course. So having that option there, I think, is a good thing to do. But on my other YouTube channel that is focused on video, then I am trying to create more content, supplementary content for the people who listen to the podcast that tends to be more visual. So that's a separate channel. And the idea is to create an audience around the video content that takes them after to the podcast and vice versa. Bit too early to see if that technique is working yet, but we'll see what happens over time. Cheers, Dave. Again, I'm Craig from inglespodcast.com, and our podcast helps non-native speakers of English to improve their English level.
Thank you so much, Craig. Next up, we have Kim.
I do B and C. Hi, this is Kim Newlove. I am the host of the Pharmacist's Voice podcast, which you can find at thepharmacistvoice.com. And I also host the Perrysburg podcast. You can find that at perrysburgpodcast.com. When I say that I do B and C, I syndicate 100% of my episodes to YouTube using a static image. But for some of the episodes that I happen to have visual content for example, with the Pharmacist's Voice podcast, I was talking about my 2024 vision board. That's talking about goals for 2024, essentially. I wanted to show the images. So not only did I syndicate the podcast episode to YouTube using a static image, but I also created an iMovie version, so an MP4, I believe they call it, and I uploaded that to YouTube on my own, and that became the YouTube version or the YouTube video version of that episode. When you go to my YouTube channel for my business, The Pharmacist's Voice, you will see two different videos. One will be for the static image, which is audio only, and the static image has an image of headphones, so that hopefully my audience will go there and see, oh, that's audio only. That's just a picture of headphones. But then I also have this image that I have uploaded as my YouTube thumbnail, and that has the YouTube icon, I guess you could say, the red and white YouTube icon. So hopefully my audience will figure out that that is the video. I hope that helps. I know everybody's different, and us sharing what we do might help somebody else. So again, this is Kim Newlove. I am the host of the Pharmacist's Voice podcast and the Perrysburg podcast. With the Pharmacist's Voice, we talk about pharmacy stuff, including drug name pronunciations. With the Perrysburg podcast, that is an informational podcast for my community called Perrysburg, Ohio. And we talk about what's in Perrysburg and why people like to live there. Again, my websites are thepharmacistvoice.com and perrysburgpodcast.com. Happy podcasting, everyone. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Kim. Next up, we have Zoe.
My name is Zoe Richardson, host of Backlook Cinema, the podcast, where we take a look back at the movies of yesteryear from the latter half of the 1900s. You can head on over to www.backlookcinema.com to find out more about our humble little show. It's a little bit complex for me. I think the best way to describe my involvement is that I am dabbling with YouTube. So my podcast is essentially audio only, and I do have an RSS feed that connects to YouTube. So that is akin to having a static image with the audio playing, and that also makes it available on YouTube Music. I have posted video clips of the show, especially if me and the guest have an interesting tidbit to talk about in our conversation that I can put out there and perhaps entice people to listen to the podcast. And a visual clip is just more interesting to look at than an audio wave. But I have yet to release an entire episode on YouTube because I really don't want to go through the process of editing an entire episode. However, I have considered putting maybe one or two full episodes streaming on YouTube without editing those. And that's only because I have a couple of guests coming on who mainly have a YouTube audience. So I'm thinking perhaps in order to encourage their audience to consume my show, I might go ahead and put out these maybe one or two episodes on YouTube, just dabbling, but not really fully committing to it. So I think that'll be my answer. Have a good one.
You too, Zoe. Next up, we have Mark.
Hi, Dave. I post a daily video to YouTube on my Timeline channel. 2 full episode videos weekly, plus 5 shorts. My Timeline channel has over 5,200 subscribers, 1.3 million views, and generates a significant portion of my creative revenues. Potential YouTube creators should know, however, that quality videos require a lot of work. This is Mark Vinette from the History of North America podcast, where I explore the wonderful and tragic stories of North America's inhabitants, heroes, villains, leaders, environment, and geography at markvinette.com.
So Mark is kind of doing much like Kim was talking about. It's a little bit 2, a little bit 3, and that is Mark never appears in any of his videos, but he doesn't have just one single image. He basically goes from an image to another image, and there's some zooming in and things like that to make it somewhat move and some words that come up. So it's not him on camera. So I wouldn't call that kind of full video, but it is video because it's not a single static image. So there are kind of hybrids. And again, the beautiful thing, it's your podcast. You make up your own rules. Next up, we got Ralph.
Hello, Dave. Ralph Estep here from the Ask Ralph podcast, Mastering Your Finances with a Christian Perspective. You may find that at AskRalphPodcast.com. He asked about whether podcasters are considering moving to video. I took the plunge about a month ago, and I've been posting my daily podcast to both YouTube and Rumble. I've also been posting shorts from the daily episode on Facebook Reels and on YouTube Shorts. And the truth is, I'm seeing as many watches on each of these platforms as I see my daily downloads of the audio-only podcasts. My Reels and YouTube Shorts are getting some excellent views as well. From a practical sense, I use Descript for recording my daily podcast, so I simply added an Elgato prompter, made sure I look somewhat respectable on camera, of course that's debatable, and I recorded all at once. And all it adds about 10 to 15 minutes a day to my processing schedule, but like I said, I've matched listeners and viewers, so I guess it's working. I wish everybody the best. If you're going to get into this video thing, go ahead and do it. Try it out and see what kind of traction you get.
Thank you, Ralph. I'll be talking about the fact that he's getting as many views on video as audio. We'll talk about that towards the end of the show. Next up, we got Bryan.
Hey, Dave, this is Bryan with Relaxed Mail. Yes, I use YouTube, but it's strictly for discoverability. I don't really care to do a whole lot more work into it. I've got just size for blog posts and the podcast itself to edit. To throw YouTube on top of that is just another bit of a headache. So I don't use more than just the static videos. I have done live videos. I've done the live streaming to YouTube before, and that does pretty good. It gets a couple folks to show up. But the overall is just static videos, just so that I can get discovered. So the discoverability aspect. So with that, that's my answer as a whole. So my name is Bryan Goodwin. I host the Relaxed Mail, and that's mail is in a dude. And I help men who are struggling in the relationships, trying to get out of the roommate syndrome, try to find a way of getting the spark back into their marriage. And we do that with each week, just kind of tackling a specific topic and helping change men's thoughts about what is possible and what they're capable of doing.
Thank you, Bryan. Next up, we have Paul.
Paul here from PassACLS.com and the Pass ACLS Tip of the Day podcast. Each weekday, I review one of the core concepts needed for medical professionals to pass their advanced cardiovascular life support class written exam and megacode. Links to subscribe and additional ACLS-related medical podcasts can be found at PassACLS.com. As far as YouTube goes, I created a channel for a short-lived podcast that I started in January. The videos were a static image that I uploaded to Libsyn along with my MP3 and episode description. Usually within 5 to 10 minutes, the video would appear on my channel along with the description. A few additional clicks on YouTube were needed to attest that the video didn't contain any AI-altered content and to set the native language for YouTube to create closed captions. And voila, it was done. In my opinion, the experiment went well. The videos on my channel actually had more listens and user engagement, so it was worth the little bit of extra work. I look forward to hearing about other School of Podcasting podcasters' YouTube experience. If you're a medical professional preparing to take ACLS, be sure to check out PassACLS.com and the Pass ACLS Tip of the Day podcast. I'm here to help you pass ACLS.
Yep. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate that. I'll have some tips, even if you're not using YouTube, how you can use YouTube to boost your audio show. That's when we get done answering this question. Next up, we have Rich.
Hey, Dave. This is Rich from Two Grumpy Vets and a Dude podcast. And your question of the month is, all podcasters are using YouTube, and which one am I? Well, I guess we do put a full video on YouTube. And the only reason why we do is because we record our podcast with Zoom. And so we do have a video clip, and we just throw it up. We don't make YouTube our main focus by no means. It's audio, and we're podcast 2.0 compliant. So we just figured, why waste the video? We'll throw it up on YouTube and see what happens from there, but we don't check it or watch it really. So that's just my answer to the question. Two Grumpy Vets and a Dude is 3 veterans who talk every week for about 3 hours, 2-3 hours, whatever. And we record our conversations, and we don't censor them. and we talk about anything we want, and we're just sharing it with the world because we talk about a lot of different things, and we're trying to show people it is okay, men especially, it is okay to sit and talk with each other and actually make it a point to do it every week. And hell, we try and figure out the world's problems, and yeah, we don't get anywhere, but we have fun trying. And plus, we keep in touch with each other. So anyway, you can find us at twogrumpyvets.com. Come listen to the show. Connect with us, talk with us. We would love to hear from you. Dave, thanks for the question of the month. Have a great day.
Thank you, Rich. Now it's time to put some food on the table. All right, back to the answers. We're going to start off with Ronnie.
Hey Dave, Ronnie here from Dancing is Forbidden, a podcast all about the beloved adult animated series Aqua Teen Hunger Force. I have 2 YouTube channels, and let me explain what I use them for. So the first one, which is really the main one, which is, as you describe it, it's static videos. It is the audio from the podcast episode with a waveform over it that kind of animates, with the sound. Easy peasy. You can set this up to be automated, of course, and it doesn't really take you any time after that. And certainly people have found the podcast because of that. Not everybody on YouTube wants to find a podcast, but some people on YouTube like podcasts. And a few of those listeners over there on the YouTube have actually gone on to become patrons. So paying supporters of the show for something that didn't really take me any effort, right? So I would really urge anybody to do that. It doesn't cost you anything. And an unintended consequence of that is that listeners of the audio podcast over on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever, they'll go to the YouTube and then comment or see what other people are saying over there. So again, might as well do it. So my second YouTube channel is kind of like an extension of the podcast, but in video form. So by that, I mean, sometimes there's topics I want to cover that make more sense to do on video. The main one being whenever I finish covering a season of Aqua Teen on my podcast, because I basically just deep dive through the episodes mainly, I like to go through and rank the episodes. It's just a little fun thing to do. And this makes more sense to do on video because that way people can get the visualization of where I'm moving the episodes around when I rank them. So I do that over there. And of course, in those videos, I mention, hey, I do this podcast. And that way listeners of the podcast go and check out that video. And anybody who might stumble across it can go to check out the podcast. So that's what I'm doing for Dancing is Forbidden. I do not I don't film myself doing the podcast, and I don't film my interviews or anything like that. It doesn't really seem worth it to me. My topic is so niche that I feel like anybody who's interested in an Aqua Teen Hunger Force podcast is going to consume the podcast in audio form or video form. I don't think that's going to be a deal breaker that they can't see me sitting at my computer talking into a webcam. It just doesn't make sense to me to do that. It's so much work, as I'm sure everybody listening knows. So that's what I'm doing, an audio only channel and a kind of like an extension of the podcast video channel. Again, I am Ronnie, host of Dancing is Forbidden. You could find me at dancingisforbidden.com. Thanks, Dave. Excited to hear what everyone else is doing.
Thank you, Ronnie. Next up, we have the one and only Todd the Gator.
Hey, Dave, it's Todd the Gator here with Guardian Downcast and the Destiny Help Desk podcast. Well, I know I've heard your past episodes of Ask the Podcast Coach, School of Podcasting, and Future of Podcasting, talking about YouTube and how it's maybe not necessarily a podcast officially, more a YouTube show, or I'm considered a YouTube content creator. I must say, however, that YouTube has been instrumental in my podcasting over the last 2 years. I have a YouTube channel where I post the old static images over a podcast audio file that my podcast host automatically does when I publish an audio episode. I also create YouTube shorts that play B-roll gameplay while pulling out an insightful 60-second quote from the podcast. I produce full 8 to 20-minute videos where I'm discussing a certain topic in the game and use voiceover scripts and then tie in an excerpt from the podcast. All three have produced some tangible results for me, including driving listeners and watchers to my constantly growing Discord community. And yes, I know your opinions on Discord, Dave, but we're all gamers, and that is what Discord was mainly created for in the beginning, was gamers. But I digress. Ever since I use YouTube as my main promotional hub, I hate Twitter and Reddit. I have grown my YouTube channel from 100 subs to over 3,400 now, and I'm a YouTube partner, which sends a few dollars my way. Let's just say I'm not quitting my day job. But more importantly, I've grown my listener base of my audio podcast substantially over the last 2 years. Now, I realize that this method may not work for everyone, but my typical listener is a gaming mom and dad in the 30 to 40 year age range. My podcast is very niche as it's tied to one specific game, but I've been impressed with the results. Once you have a good template, YouTube Shorts take about 15 minutes to create, but more long-form videos can take hours. So that is how I use YouTube to promote my podcast. I listen to about 10 or so podcasts every week about all kinds of things, but this very podcast starts my week without fail. It's the very first one of the week. You do a great job, Dave, and I know we podcasters don't hear that enough as we labor over the keyboard writing scripts or editing audio late into the night or video. I've drank the Kool-Aid and I don't see myself stopping anytime soon. I have a podcast about the Bungie Destiny gaming franchise called Guardian Downcast, where I hear the stories about those gamers you see on the screen but have never known really who they are or what their lives are about. I cover the latest news and events in gaming and have a robust community surrounding it. I also have a more focused podcast called the Destiny Help Desk, where my goal is to create a conduit for those thinking about playing Destiny 2 and future Bungie games. You can find out more by going to guardiandowncast.com and destinyhelpdeskpodcast.com. Thanks, Dave, and I'll be checking my podcast feed on Monday. Take care.
Todd, here I am every Monday, haven't missed for 19 years. And I just got to say, we're not done yet. And I'm already just like, man, I love my audience. These are really good answers. Next up, we got Tim.
Hey, Dave. This is Timothy Chemo Bryan, head instigator at Create Art Podcast, where I help my listeners tame that inner critic and create more than they consume. You can find that at createartpodcast.com. I'm also everyone's favorite guide to the pod sphere with my other podcast, Find a Podcast About. And that's where I help my listeners find their next binge-worthy podcast and outsmart the algorithm. You can find that one at findapodcastabout.xyz. But I am going to say I am a 3.1 or maybe 3-point asterisk. I do my podcast for Create Art Podcast as a full video but there's a caveat to it. April is National Poetry Writing Month. November is National Novel Writing Month. So for those 2 months, I don't do videos with my podcast. The rest of the time, I do videos. And with Create Art Podcast, I'm usually doing a episode every 2 weeks. So it allows me the time to, go ahead and do those videos and just add them in to YouTube, and I have it set up through my media host, which I'm now using Captivate for all my podcasts. But I do it that way, and then I also use another program to automate my posts, and I do videos for those. I'll usually do a batch recording of those videos, and the software that I use is called Clipchamp. Now I'm running a PC computer here, and Clipchamp is free. They do have higher tiers, but I keep it pretty simple. I use the KISS method. Keep it simple, stupid, because I am not a YouTuber per se. Now, why do I do a video? Well, because I'm talking about art, sometimes things need to be shown, but I try to describe it in a way for my audio only listeners, so that way they can still get the mental picture of what I'm trying to describe. But sometimes it's just easier to show it on a video. Should everybody do video? No, not everyone should do video. But I like doing video because I have my avatar and it's just off the camera. I actually have an actual person that is my avatar that I do my shows for. But when I'm looking at the video, I feel more connected. I don't know how to explain it other than I feel more connected when I'm doing a video to my audience. That's me. That works for me. May not work for everybody. But I think, adding a video for me adds that little extra oomph for my presentation. And I've noticed that my episodes, to me, feel like I'm connecting closer with my audience when I do a video. Anyhow, Dave, can't wait to see you in August over at Podcast Movement up in DC. And thank you for all that you do. Have a great day.
Thank you, Tim. Yep, looking forward to seeing you. Next up, we have another Dave.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for the opportunity. This is Dave Paul with the podcast Walking is Fitness at walkingisfitness.com. Walking is Fitness is a daily 10-minute podcast that is designed to encourage and motivate others to begin pursuing fitness with a daily 10-minute walk. I don't record the podcast while I'm in a studio. Instead, I record each episode while I'm outside walking, so listeners hear what's happening around me. They can hear nature. If traffic goes by, they hear that. If there are sirens in the background, they hear that too. So essentially, we're taking a 10-minute walk together. I guess I'm using option 3 with a little bit of a twist. This podcast doesn't work really well on YouTube because it's not designed to be listened to while you're sitting. It's designed to be listened to while you're moving, and most listeners are listening outside. But growing a podcast is hard, and it's hard to ignore the power of YouTube. It is a huge search engine, plus the recommendation feature. They potentially could be putting your videos in front of new viewers every day, maybe even every hour. So what I'm doing, each week I film a fresh video that's separate from the podcast. Still, it's about walking, and I film these while I'm out walking. Each is 7 to 10 minutes long, and I invite viewers to check out the podcast Walking is Fitness, often twice, usually within the first minute, and then again at the end. In the last 7 days, 3,500 views to my video, so that's 3,500 people, roughly, that have been invited to check out the podcast, and it appears to be working. Since I've started doing this, which was at the beginning of this year, my downloads have increased 28%. So I guess it's option 3 with a little bit of a twist. Dave, thanks for the opportunity. Again, this is Dave Paul with the podcast Walking is Fitness.
Thank you, Dave. Next up, he's only got one name. He's like Liberace. York.
Hi, Dave. This is York from Welcome to Earth Stories. You probably heard it being said that you need to know your audience and really zero in on them. I thought for a while I was writing my stories that my wife was a part of that audience. But painfully, even though she supports the show, she doesn't listen to the podcast. Why? Because it's an audio only. She said that if my stories was on YouTube, that she'll watch. But I do audio fiction, sci-fi stuff. I can't just talk on the microphone on YouTube without the visuals. For this to really work, I even said this to her, that I have to hire, Ridley Scott to direct one of my stories, John Williams to do the music, and have millions and millions of dollars to produce one of my stories. And I just don't have that kind of budget. Where am I going to get millions of dollars? And also, where am I going to get Scarlett Johansson and different actors to play certain roles? So unfortunately, my wife does not listen to the show because of that. And that's okay. I'm not everyone's cup of tea. I'm not going to kill myself to produce a YouTube channel that has an extremely high budget. If I were doing a straightforward interview, I guess I could do that, but my stuff is not straightforward. I've experimented by just doing a little bit of YouTube shorts where I will talk about something kind of related to the show, and then at the end say, if you want to hear more about this topic, then listen to my podcast. I don't do a lot of them. I'm an audio person mostly. And so it takes me a while to set up and produce something that looks really good on camera. If you want to hear more about me and the craziness of Welcome to Earth Stories, then you can go to my website, welcometoearthstories.com. These are sci-fi shows with a bit of reality thrown in and commentary as well at welcometoearthstories.com. Also, my spin-off show is available as well, Experimental Stories. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, York. So as I looked at this, first of all, I was surprised. I expected a lot more people saying, I'm just audio only. And we heard people say, I started that way. And a lot of people are doing the static image. And then I was surprised at how many people, because if you said I'm doing shorts, I'm calling that a full video. You didn't say if it was like face on camera kind of thing. But anyway, I counted myself. I have a number of shows that I don't do anything on YouTube for, but if you stand next to me for more than 20 minutes, I will start another podcast. So that's part of the problem there. So we'll count me as the 4% that's not doing anything, but I'm also part of that group that does the static thing. So that was 42%. And I also do full video for some of my shows. I do live streaming stuff. So that was 54%. So the majority of people are doing things on YouTube. So I was surprised by that. And the one thing I wanted to bring up here, people talked about getting more engagement. Yes. The good news is you will have people leaving comments on your videos. That's the good news. The bad news is they're not always kind. So be aware of that and don't feed the trolls. If they say something nasty, just, you could always delete it or whatever. And then the other thing I would look at is, especially when you're like, wow, I'm getting the same amount of, I know Ralph said this. He said, I'm getting the same number of views on YouTube or video than I am on audio. And I would go in and look at, now also remember, Ralph is a guy that I would almost consider a traditional YouTuber now because his episodes are short. They're probably less than 10 minutes. And so I looked at last week's episode that I did with Mark from the Practical Prepping Show. If you haven't heard that, go out to schoolofpodcasting.com/follow, and you can follow and never miss an episode. Notice how I put my brand in there. Notice how I also didn't say, find me wherever you find podcasts. I made it easy. The button's right there, schoolofpodcasting.com/follow. But that episode was 38 minutes. And on the audio only side, and this is just using Apple. So my Apple listeners listened to 30 minutes of that, which is 81%. And yet when I looked at how far did people listen to that exact same thing with a static image, they listened to 1.5 minutes of it. Now, again, discoverability. Yep. And it's free. I, again, am using Libsyn to submit it to YouTube automatically. So that's a static image show. So that's probably why it's not getting a great average watch, but it was free. It took 5 minutes to set up. Why not? And again, discoverability, which it did get discovered quite a bit. I noticed that I had a lot of impressions, which means we put your artwork up for somebody to click on it, and I didn't get many clicks, which means maybe I got to work on my artwork a little bit on YouTube. But again, if in the case of like Libsyn, in full disclosure, I'm the head of podcaster education at Libsyn, but there are other ways that you can submit your show to YouTube. You can actually just give them your RSS feed now, and then you have to go in and make a playlist and then wave your magic wand at it and go, you're a podcast. Yeah, and it's a podcast. And I'll put a link to the episode where I talk about the different types of video podcasting, and I would call that a YouTube podcast because it only goes to YouTube and YouTube Music. But that's a whole other episode that I don't want to go into. The other thing I want to talk about, how you can use YouTube even if you're not doing anything with video. And that is, it's a great tool to see what's popular in your genre. So if I went out to YouTube and up at the upper right-hand corner, right, they've got the little search bar. So type in whatever your show is about. So if it's about pygmy ponies or whatever it is, mental health, insert subject here, do that. Then you'll see the person that ranks the highest for that. Click on that, and then you can go in and click on their videos and sort them by the most popular. And with 3 clicks, you've then got a list of subjects that your audience, if your show is about the same topic, that your audience is saying, I want more of that. You can also see comments there. So you can see if somebody goes, I would have liked this episode, but they didn't talk about nya, nya, nya. Well, then you can make a episode about nya, nya, nya. And maybe that will attract more people. So you can also do this with Amazon, a couple different places. But if you ever wonder, like, what should I talk about? That's not a bad way to figure it out. Because again, people will leave comments. They'll leave them there. And some of them are great. They'll give you a little thumbs up, things like that. And other people are just trolls. And do not feed the trolls. Thanks again to everyone who chimed in. I deeply appreciate it. And if you go to schoolofpodcasting.com/933, you'll see where I have links to everyone's show. In the next couple of weeks, I'm going to have Matt Kundell on from the Sound Off podcast. He's celebrating 400 episodes. Speaking of that, congratulations to my buddy Harry Duran over at Podcast Junkies. He just celebrated 10 years. And I'm working on an episode, and I keep just finding more stuff to help answer the question, what makes good content? Or for better purposes, like, what makes your podcast grow? Because the answer is good content and asking people to share, et cetera, et cetera. And I just keep finding more things that I'm like, ooh, I'm going to add that to it. So I'm leaving it in the oven a little longer than I planned on, but I'm glad because I keep finding more stuff. Now, again, if you want to see all my episodes, it's super simple. schoolofpodcasting.com/follow. You can follow in your favorite app, and I've got, 900 plus episodes there. Or speaking of schoolofpodcasting.com, while you're there, click on the sign up button in the upper right-hand corner, use the coupon code LISTENER, and that'll save you on either a monthly or yearly subscription, and you can join absolutely worry-free. If you start off and you're like, Dave, this isn't really what I thought it was, if it's any time within that first 30 days, I will refund your money, no questions asked. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you like this show, please tell a friend. If you hate this show, please tell a friend. Yeah, schoolofpodcasting.com. Thanks so much. Until next week, take care. God bless. Class is dismissed. So that's over 80% of that particular show. Hey, look, kids, I'm going to have a thunderstorm. Thank you, Mark and Krista over at practicalprepping.info. I am practically prepped.